This is your spoiler warning for The End of Time, parts 1 and 2. If you have not seen The End of Time, then please leave now, but if you're sticking with me, then let's discuss it. So, The End of Time was recently released in theaters for its 10th anniversary. Although it didn't actually come out 10 years, it might have something to do with filming, or just a better release date would be in August than around New Year's. I don't really know. But it's been almost 10 years since The End of Time first aired, and I just recently saw it on the big screen, and I have to say, I love this story. I have always loved this story. I think it's a brilliant one, and there's so many things that work so well about it, and there are a couple of things that don't work perfectly about it, and I think just the older I get, the more I can see the things that do work and the things that don't work. And having rewatched it, I just have to say it was brilliant. There's so much that works about this one. And there is a lot in this one. This is basically a 2.5-hour story jam-packed with stuff, but it never feels like it's overstuffed. I think a lot of it is balanced really well and paced well, and it has a lot of stuff going in here that just works well. And for this re-release, then what they've done is basically merge the two parts together. So the part where the End of Time Part 1 ends and then the End of Time Part 2 starts, they have it sort of transition into that next part as seamlessly as they can do. And they do a pretty decent job. I think they did about as good of a job as you could transitioning those two parts. They did a pretty decent job with that. And you've seen this, of course. David Tennant is excellent in this special. This is his last episode in his era as the Doctor, with Russell T Davies writing him, and he's brilliant. There's so many fantastic lines that he has, not like quotes that are memorable, but just really well written and well performed lines from David Tennant. Stuff when he sees Donna, when he's talking to Wilf, and there's just stuff that works really well in here. And this episode does a thing where it brings back Donna, which is a risky move because the way Donna left, bringing her back in any way, it does risk messing with that exit, which is a brilliant exit for a companion. But it's handled really well and really tastefully, and the stuff with Donna works really well. It's really kind of heartbreaking, you know, seeing the Doctor see Donna but not being able to talk to her, you know, all that kind of stuff. And there is some truly heartbreaking stuff in this story, and that is one of them. There is a scene between the Doctor and Wilf, and I know my thoughts are a little bit rambly, but bear with me, that is equally heartbreaking, possibly more so, where Wilf is trying to convince him to take this gun because he doesn't want the Doctor to die. He doesn't want him to die. So he gives him this gun. He tries to get him to take it, but he keeps refusing. He's like, no, I won't do that. And then he finds out the Time Lords are back, and he immediately takes it. And the way that scene flows into the next part of the story is just handled really well. The way that it shows, no, the Doctor will not take this. He's not going to take this gun from Wilf to save his own life. But as soon as he learns the Time Lords are returning, that changes the game. He takes that gun and he goes down. And I know I'm kind of going all over the place. So let's back it up a little bit. Let's talk about John Sim. So this is one of the things that I think 95% of the work, about 90-95%, works really well. John Sim is fantastic in this story. There's no questioning that. John Sim is great. He does play the Master as a little bit more insane and a little bit less, I don't know, because he's insane in, you know, Sound of Drums, Last of the Time Lords. But in this, it's a little bit of a different kind of insane. Something has snapped inside of his brain, and he is at a different level. Because before, he was able to be manipulative and do stuff and you know, convince people of things and do all of this stuff in, you know, a rather clever fashion, if that's okay with me to say. But here, he's just crazy. You know, during his resurrection, which is such an interesting thing, because there's some stuff this story does which, if handled poorly, wouldn't work. The Master's resurrection, that might not work, but I think it's handled pretty well, if I'm being honest. And it kind of depends on how much you can get on board with these different kinds of aspects, because that is a very very much not like a sci-fi concept, but Doctor Who can go in those kinds of directions, and if you're okay with it, and I totally was, then you can get on board for that, and it can be pretty great. And the way that, I don't know if I totally believe that there are people that would necessarily work to bring the Master back, but I can roll with it, and I totally believe that Lucy would work against that, and how she works against that and that informs where the Master gets to in this story, because he's totally messed up. His actual body is messed up. He keeps flashing blue, and he can like jump like crazy and do all of this stuff, which some people think is a bit too much, and to a certain extent I agree. There is one scene in particular where he yells dinner time, where it just pushes the boundaries just a little bit too much for me, and you know, that's probably the worst scene of this whole story. But it's not completely awful, it just doesn't totally work. But John Sim is still great. He's still brilliant. He still like totally performs in this story, and he is a presence to behold, and he gets to do so much. And I do think he's a great Master, and this is probably my second favorite appearance of his. He's just fantastic in this. And any story that I talk about that has John Sim as the Master in it, I am going to praise, because I think he is a fantastic Master. And I think he's the second Master I ever encountered, because I think the first Master that I saw would have been Anthony Ainley's Master, probably in Keeper of Traken, Logopolis. I saw Castorova. I saw those stories, I think, before I saw Utopia. But this was the Master that really connected with me when I was young. And really, I don't know about connected. He just clicked with me, because there's something about him he's so evil, but he's so much fun, and it comes down to the performance of John Sim. He's just able to have so much fun with his part, and I better stop talking about John Sim too much, because he's so brilliant. But I want to mention that reveal towards the end of this first part, where we find out John Sim is turning everyone into the Master, is fantastic, and it's one of those moments that's like, oh my gosh, that's incredible. Because like right now I'm actually smiling talking about it, because it's so much fun to watch John Sim just be all these different people, but it's also like totally evil and like totally wrong, and also like, oh my gosh, he has turned everyone into himself. He has conquered humanity entirely. What can we do? Like that, it's done, you know. So it's one of those moments that just perfectly balances, just like, oh my gosh, this is a big threat, but also it's just so much fun, so you just enjoy the ride, and that's great. Also, by the way, this story starts off, I forget the exact, it starts off with narration, that's right, I believe it starts off with a narration. But basically, at a certain point, we start with the Doctor going to see the Ood, and it's very clear between this one and The Waters of Mars, which I also just rewatched, the Doctor, a lot has happened, because The Waters of Mars ends with the Doctor going to see the Ood, and this episode ends with him arriving there and being, let's just say, much more chipper than he was in The Waters of Mars, because, you know, at the end of that episode, going into this one, it's gonna start off in a really dark place. And ultimately, it was probably a wise decision to have the Doctor have done more between these 2 points. Obviously, he doesn't want to die. It makes sense that he would delay that. So he goes off, he does some more stuff, he tries to have fun, and then he gets to this point in the end of time, where he has had fun, and he is no longer in such a dark place, so that this story can start off in a little bit more of a positive way, because this story kind of needs to have some level of humor throughout, and they manage that pretty well. Wilf is one of the shining highlights of this whole story. Bernard Cribbins as this character is so delightful and amazing and heartbreaking and just so wonderful. Every episode he's in, he is one of the best parts of the episode because he's just that good. He's just that good. And in this story he also is. And he's working with a group of older individuals who he is basically rallied together to help him look for the Doctor. And they find him really quickly because... And the story, you know, that comes up. The Doctor's like, hey, why, how come you can find me so quickly? It takes people ages to find me, but you just so quickly you find me. How is that possible? So that's kind of interesting, and I like that, how it's played into the story a little bit. And also, I just think this first part is really, really solid. I remember as a kid, when I first saw the story, the second part was always the part that stood out to me. I love this story, but the second part was the part, and it still is the better part. It is legitimately the better part. But the first part is really solid, and I can't take anything away from it. There's so much that works here. It's paced really well. There's a lot of really good stuff. These green aliens, who I can't quite remember the name of, the Vinvachi or something. I'm not quite sure. They work really well. They just kind of start off as like, oh, these people that are definitely up to something. What are they up to? Oh, they're aliens. That's fun. And the way there's just so much that comes together in the story, and the return of the Time Lords is magnificent. The way that it ends this first story with those two great cliffhangers working simultaneously of, oh, the Master's everyone, holy crap, and also, oh, the Time Lords have returned. How is that going to play out? Oh, no. And then the Doctor, of course, finds out and is devastated. He's like, oh, my, I cannot believe this has happened. And he takes that gun. And I believe that's in the second part. But oh, man, so much is so good. Timothy Dalton is fantastic in this one. And I like the way that he's just great as Rassilon. He is fantastic. He really just gives such a performance that he really captures the screen. It's theatrical is what it is. That's the word that was escaping me. And I do like what they've done with the Gallifreyans, the Time Lords, where they are basically not good. They have gotten to a point where they're not good. They're a tiny bit evil. I say a tiny bit, more than a tiny bit evil. They're bad. And that works well. The way the Doctor's like, that's how I choose to remember them. They're not good. Towards the end, they did some bad stuff, and they should not be here. And man, I could just talk about the story forever, couldn't I? I'm gonna try to keep this under 20 minutes, just because. I'm gonna I'm gonna review the story again much later down the line. I would guess in like 3 years or something. No, more than 3. I don't know. In a long time, I'll end up reviewing this one. But so I'll be able to really go in more in depth probably. But I really there's just so much in this story to talk about that it's just trying to just talk and have, because this is not a scripted video if you couldn't tell. Just talk about everything that happened in the story. There's just so much, maybe too much. But it just works so well. I really think this is a brilliant send-off to the 10th Doctor. I was very, very pleased with this episode. It is one of my favorite David Tennant episodes. Definitely in my top 10. And exactly where in that top 10, I'm not entirely sure, but it's in my top 10 for sure, 10th Doctor episodes. And it's fantastic. And the return of the Time Lords is handled well. Donna is handled well. Wilf is handled well. The Doctor's handled well. The Master is handled well. Their dynamic is handled brilliantly. There's a wonderful moment in part 1 when the Doctor puts his head up to the Master's and he can hear the drums, and he's shocked. He can't believe it. He can't believe that he can hear the drums that the Master has been hearing, because he didn't think that they were real. And then he hears them, and just David Tennant performs that scene brilliantly, as does John Sim, of course. And yeah, and also I would like to take just a second to appreciate just all of the scenes with John Sim playing so many different versions of himself. It's so much fun, and the amount of effort that would have taken, all those costume changes, all that green screen, it was worth it, because it is truly a moment, and it feels like something to behold, and it's handled really well, and I really appreciate that. And basically the best part of this whole story, and there's maybe a couple of moments that aren't quite the best, and there is a moment, so after the Doctor and the aliens and Wilf go up onto the spaceship, where they come back down, there's maybe a couple minute sequence where they're trying to fight off the nuclear warheads or whatever, the missiles. They're trying to not get hit, And that is a sequence that feels necessary because they're trying to get to the next point in the story, and that's the logical way to go about that. But it also feels like that's not the most interesting aspect of the story, simply because it's just an action sequence, and it's not terribly interesting when it's just, oh, this is just happening. But it's not bad, it's just kind of there, and it doesn't really interrupt the flow of the story, because it is just getting to the next point. And the point that it gets to is one of the best parts. Oh, it's just like one of the best parts of the whole episode, when the Doctor crashes through that window and comes down, crashes through all of that glass, and sees the Time Lords return, and sees the Master, and just there's so much about the scene that just works really well. Him turning around back and forth towards the Master and towards the Time Lords, and then seeing this woman who I have always taken to be the Doctor's mother, and I know that Russell T Davies wrote it with that intention, but it is open to interpretation. If you believe it's someone else like Romana or the Ronnie, I don't know who else you would think it might be, but you can believe that's whoever you want. For me, that moment feels like it is his mother looking at him, and then he recalculates that situation. He's like, I can't do this. Seeing his mother is it puts something new in his brain. It reminds him of who he is and who he should be, who he strives to be, you know? And that moment is handled really well. And then he destroys the device and sends the Time Lords back with the Master. And it's just fantastic. It's such a brilliant sequence. And then the Doctor thinks he's won, and it's such a incredible moment of relief. Yes, he's done it. He's won. It's over. It's fantastic. He thought the Master has been knocking 4 times this whole time, and he knew that was a prophecy. And this whole story is about him not wanting to die and trying to not die, but knowing that he will. And then he gets to this point where he's like, yes, I did it. Somehow I did it. And then he hears those 4 knocks. And it's so heartbreaking. It's so heartbreaking. He hears those 4 knocks, and he immediately knows exactly what's happening. He knows who's knocking. He knows where they're knocking from. He knows the situation they're in, and he knows what he has to do. And he's crushed. Because ultimately, the 10th Doctor is the most vain Doctor. And as he says at the end of the story, he doesn't want to go. He wants to be the best that he can be. And this story, and even the last story too, but this one as well, does something very interesting in that it shows you more about this Doctor. It kind of puts things a little bit more to the forefront. We see more of the vanity in the 10th Doctor than we had completely seen. It was there always, but it comes to the forefront. And I know there's people that don't like this sequence, but I just think it's brilliant, and it's performed so well, and it's acted so well, and the dialogue is so brilliant, and it's so heartbreaking. And the Doctor doing what he knows he has to do, but ultimately just wanting to do more as himself and not die. It's just, And then when he says, it would be my honor, it's so, it's such a great sequence. I love it so much. And you're welcome to hate it, but I love it. And it's brilliant. And then that scene basically concludes the story. And then basically where you would move into next is the Regeneration. But this story doesn't do that. This story does something that I love so much. It basically does a Return of the King ending, where we have all of these different characters, and we kind of see where they're at. With Return of the King, it actually makes a little bit more sense, just because there's more characters in their forefront, really, of that trilogy. But here, it's more the Doctor going to visit these people to save some of their lives. He saves Martha's life. He saves Sarah Jane's kid's life. He saves... is there another one I forget? And he just sees all these people, and there's just like several great moments here. The moment when he sees Sarah Jane, the moment when he sees Martha and Mickey, the moment when he sees I forget her name, but obviously the descendant of the woman he knew in Human Nature and Family of Blood. That was a great moment. And, of course, the wonderful, wonderful scene with Captain Jack Harkness, who is just one of the best characters ever on Doctor Who, ever, is a fantastic scene where he gives him the paper that says his name is Alonzo. That's great. And then, of course, the brilliant, brilliant scene with Rose and Jackie, where he sees Rose. And then it leads to his regeneration, which is heartbreaking. It's so sad. I cry when I watch that regeneration. It's not the only point I cry in this story. I cry multiple points in this story. But it's so sad. He doesn't want to go. And this story just totally works for me. It feels like a proper end to the 10th Doctor's era, written brilliantly by Russell T Davies and performed brilliantly by all of the amazing cast. And this feels like a great end to that era. And him going in here with the incredible music by Murray Gold, and as his hands start to glow and the music builds and the camera pulls in and he says, "I don't want to go." And it's heartbreaking. It really is for me. It's so heartbreaking. And I think it's brilliant. And I really just think it is fantastic. And then he regenerates. And it's so sad. And I love it so much. And regenerations have a difficult thing to pull off in that you regenerate a Doctor, and it is sad. It is sad to see them go. How could it not be? You know? If you like that Doctor, how could it not be sad to see them go? And I like how this story really embraces that, honestly, more than any other story. It really tugs at the heartstrings. It really, really just tries to embed an axe deep in your heart. And then this story goes for that more than any other story. And it's great. The only one little nitpick I have about it is that it feels like a bit of tonal whiplash when you jump from that right into Matt Smith's first scene as the Doctor with that quirky music, that upbeat music. It feels like it doesn't quite flow like it needs to flow, which is forgivable, obviously, but it just doesn't quite work. And it's that thing that I think the Ninth Doctor's regeneration pulled off really well, where it managed to feel sad, but then it wasn't too much of whiplash when you saw the next Doctor. But here it was just a little bit too much, and that's my one little nitpick. But obviously that was handled by two different people. The Stephen Moffat team took over for that final scene. That wasn't done by Russell T Davies and his team. So, you know, it's a different story because they weren't able to handle, but it was handled by different people. So that kind of thing can happen when a new person picks up with the last minute of a story. Then you can have a little bit of that. But other than that, there's just so much. That ending is brilliant, and the story I think is brilliant. Overall, I think The End of Time is a fantastic 10th Doctor story and a fantastic story in Doctor Who. It is probably the best regeneration story. Not necessarily, but definitely one of the very, very best regeneration stories ever put to screen. It is so fantastic. All the characters are great. The Master is great. The Doctor is great. Wilf is great. This is a fantastic story told over 2.5 hours really well. I really enjoy the kind of story it is. It's the kind of story that I love, and it's put onto screen really well and really delightfully. And this is just fantastically made, fantastically written, absolutely heartbreaking, and feels like an incredibly appropriate end to this incredible era with David Tennant as a Doctor. And I absolutely love The End of Time, and I'm going to give it a rating of 9.5 out of 10. Now that rating is subject to change. I was between a couple of ratings. I was between 9.5 and 9.75, and I'm still not entirely sure if I picked the right one. It's fantastic. It gets a fantastic rating because it's a fantastic story. And you know what? When I come back to it in a few years' time, it's possible I'll bump it up. Maybe it's possible I'll bump it down. That's very unlikely. So we'll see how that goes. And yeah. This is a fantastic story. After I saw this story, I commented on Russell T Davies, a post of Russell T Davies on Instagram, telling him how much I loved his story, and he responded and he said thank you, and that kind of warmed my heart, because Russell T Davies is such an influential person in those first few years of Doctor Who when it was revived, and he is responsible for a million amazing things about the show, and some of my very favorite episodes, including this one, and for casting two of the best Doctors of all time, and for creating Captain Jack Harkness, and so much more. So that was pretty special for me when he saw that and knows that I love his story. So I just wanted to mention that, a little bit self-indulgent. Yeah, that's all for today, folks. What do you think about The End of Time? I've sat here for, I don't know, like 25 minutes talking about it, which was not the goal, but it's just what ends up happening when you love a story so much. So yeah, this is brilliant. I didn't necessarily get to talk about quite everything that I loved, because there's just a lot of stuff jammed into this story, and I don't want this video to be too long. So, what do you think about The End of Time? Do you love it? Do you hate it? Let me know. I would be very interested to hear what you have to say about it. I am in love with the story, and am very interested to hear what you folks have to say about it. So, if you're interested, I have lots of classic Doctor Who reviews. I have some Series 11 reviews up. I've got some TV show reviews for Euphoria, Game of Thrones, Black Mirror, Good Omens, lots of random stuff like Veep and Star Trek, and if you're interested in any of that kind of stuff, feel free to check it out. Doctor Who Rankings should have a Cyberman ranking for the new Who Cyberman stories out on August the 11th, and I don't know when this video is going to drop. It's probably going to be after that, so that should already be out. So if you're interested in that, check it out. If not, that's cool. I appreciate your time here today. With that said, that's going to do it for now, folks. So, thank you for watching, take care, and have yourselves a lovely week.